He begins by telling a truth that was buried for centuries, a truth that rewrites everything people were taught about power, courage, and the shape of the ancient world. He says that long before Europe called itself the center of civilization, there was a kingdom in the heart of Africa whose people walked with confidence, whose rulers led with pride, and whose armies stood tall under the desert sun. And in that kingdom lived a queen, whose story should have been carved into every textbook, every monument, and every memory. But instead, history worked hard to silence her name. She faced the greatest army of her age, refused to kneel, and forced an empire to retreat. Yet today, almost no one is taught who she was. This is the forgotten story of Queen Amanirenas of Kush, the woman who defied Rome. Before the journey begins, he turns to the viewer and makes a request. If you believe history should include every voice, not just the loudest ones, then subscribe right now. Because this channel uncovers the stories they erased on purpose. Hit the button, ring the bell, and share this video with someone who deserves to know the truth. Now, let's begin. He takes the listener back more than 2,000 years, deep into the northeastern deserts of Africa, where the land glowed gold beneath the sun and the Nile carved through the earth like a living ribbon. This was the kingdom of Kush, an ancient African civilization older than some European nations today, a land of builders, traders, scholars, warriors, and kings and queens whose power shaped generations. Kush was not a dusty relic or a forgotten footnote. It was a thriving empire with its own writing system, its own armies, its own gods, and its own way of life. Pyramids rose from its deserts, sharp and tall. Cities bustled with merchants carrying ivory, iron, incense, and gold. And behind its walls, the people spoke with pride, because they belonged to a nation that had stood strong for centuries. But strength, as history always shows, attracts enemies. To the north lay Rome, the rising superpower of the world. Rome had already swallowed Mediterranean kingdoms, North African cities, and stretches of land across Europe. And after conquering Egypt, Rome looked south and saw Kush. Rome believed that no kingdom should stand independent beside their newly claimed territory. Rome believed that power could only be expressed through control. Rome believed they could take whatever they wanted. Kush believed otherwise. At this time, Kush was ruled by a powerful queen. Her name was Amanirenas, and she was not a ruler who hid behind palace walls or golden statues. She was known for her courage, her sharp mind, and her unwavering devotion to her people. She inherited a proud tradition. In Kush, women could rule as queens in their own right, lead councils, command armies, and negotiate with foreign nations. Power was not limited by gender. It belonged to whoever could carry it with honor. And Amanirenas carried it with a strength that transformed her into a legend. When she took the throne, she inherited a kingdom that had learned to balance diplomacy with military defense. Kush had maintained peace with Egypt for years under previous rulers. But peace shifted when the Romans replaced Egypt's rulers. Rome was not interested in partnership. They wanted obedience. Amanirenas recognized what was coming long before the first Roman soldier crossed the border. She saw the shift in trade routes, the rising tension at the frontier, the heavy taxes Rome tried to enforce on nearby lands, and the increased military presence along the Nile. Rome wanted to make Kush just another province. They wanted Kush's wealth, its resources, its strategic location, and its independence. But she refused to let her kingdom become another trophy in Rome's endless hunger. When Rome pushed, she pushed back harder. He describes her early rule like the rising of a storm. Amanirenas was not only a political leader, She was trained in the ways of war, strategy, and discipline. She rode horses, practiced archery, learned the meaning of leadership through action, and listened to the wisdom of older commanders. She was known for walking among her people, learning their needs, earning their respect not through fear, but through a connection that united the kingdom. In times of peace, she strengthened the military. In times of uncertainty, she prepared the defenses. She understood that a kingdom stays free only when it can protect itself. So when Rome attempted to extend its authority into Kush's lands, the queen did not wait for diplomacy to fail. She chose action. The narrator explains how, in 25 BCE, Rome sent administrators south to enforce taxes and expand Roman control. To Rome, this was a normal step in empire building. To Kush, it was an insult. Amanirenas knew that once Rome established authority over even a small part of Kush territory, the rest would follow. If she allowed a foothold, her children, her grandchildren, and all generations after would live under the shadow of Rome. She refused that future. With boldness rarely seen in ancient history, Amanirenas gathered her warriors, archers known for their deadly accuracy, cavalry riders who moved like wind across the desert, and infantry who marched with discipline learned across generations. She led them north toward Egypt in a surprise strike that caught Rome off guard. Her forces swept into Roman-held towns and garrisons, taking strategic sites before Rome had time to respond. She captured territory, destroyed Roman statues meant to symbolize imperial control, and declared through her actions that Kush would never be anyone's subject. Rome, shocked and angered, prepared for revenge. The narrator pauses to remind the listener, Rome was not just any empire. Rome was the most powerful military force of its time. Its legions were feared across continents. Its generals were legends in their own right. Rome expected to win every battle, conquer every land, and silence every opponent. So when they were challenged by a queen from a kingdom they considered inferior, their pride burned hotter than their camps in the desert. Thus began a war that history barely mentions, a war Rome expected to win easily, but one that exposed their vulnerability. Rome sent its forces south under a skilled general, intending to crush Kush quickly. But crossing into Kush territory was not like marching through Europe. The land was unforgiving. Scorching heat, endless sand, unfamiliar terrain, and narrow paths that swallowed soldiers whole. Amanirenas knew the land better than any invader. She used the desert as a shield and as a weapon. He describes the way her strategies turned Rome's strength into weakness. Her warriors executed hit-and-run tactics, disrupting supply lines, attacking at night, and disappearing before Roman troops could respond. They moved quietly through dunes, striking when the enemy least expected. Roman soldiers, weighed down by armor, struggled to fight in the sand. Their shields slowed them. Their formations broke apart. Their morale weakened. The war grew fiercer. Rome eventually captured some towns in the north and pushed toward the Kushite capital. The narrator emphasizes how dangerous this moment was. For any kingdom, losing the capital can mean the end of sovereignty. But Amanirenas did not retreat. She regrouped, studied Roman patterns, and struck at the empire's weaknesses. Even after suffering personal losses, including losing her son in battle and sustaining injuries herself, she continued to fight. She led from the front. Her presence alone inspired warriors, and because of her leadership, Kush did not break. He explains that ancient writings mention a courageous queen with fierce determination who fought Rome with great bravery. They wrote of a queen who had one eye due to injury, but never lost her vision for her people. They wrote of her armies that fought with skill. These are Roman sources, written by her enemies, yet even they could not deny her strength. Rome pushed deeper into Kush territory, expecting surrender. Instead, they faced a queen who refused to yield. Her forces struck with precision, targeting Roman leaders and isolating Roman camps. Unable to maintain supply lines and facing unfamiliar terrain, Rome realized this war would not be simple. Then came the battle that changed everything. He describes how Amanirenas launched a powerful counterattack that caught Roman forces off guard. Her warriors overran enemy positions, disrupted communication, and forced Rome to reconsider its ambitions. Rome, frustrated and drained, understood that Kush was not a land to be easily conquered. The price of victory would be too high. Even their control over Egypt was threatened by the constant pressure from the south. They needed peace. It was a rare moment in Roman history. An empire accustomed to domination was forced to negotiate with a kingdom they wanted to control. Amanirenas met the Romans not as a defeated ruler, but as an equal. The negotiations produced a treaty that favored Kush. Rome agreed to withdraw from most of the captured territories. Rome canceled the taxes they tried to impose. Rome accepted that Kush would remain free, sovereign, and independent. This was not just a peace agreement. It was a victory. And it was a victory achieved by a black queen leading an African kingdom against one of the strongest empires the world has ever known. He explains how astonishing this truly is. Rome conquered massive territories, parts of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Rome toppled kingdoms and crushed rebellions. But Rome could not conquer Kush. Rome could not break Amanirenas. The empire that placed its flag across the world was forced to retreat because a queen refused to kneel. This should have been one of the greatest stories in ancient history, a tale of resistance, strategy, bravery, and African power. But instead, it was erased. The narrator reveals how later historians attempted to minimize her victories. They claimed the war was small, the queen insignificant, the treaty unimportant. They twisted records, altered interpretations, and downplayed her impact. Statues that once stood proudly began to crumble. Her story faded from mainstream teachings. And as European dominance grew centuries later, the history of Africa's achievements was intentionally buried. The people who wrote textbooks wanted a world where Africa was seen as passive, weak, and without agency. A queen who defeated Rome did not fit the story they wanted to tell. So they removed her from it. Generations grew up without learning her name. Museums ignored her. School curriculums skipped her. Modern films rarely mention her. And while children memorized the names of Roman generals and European kings, the queen who stood against Rome disappeared from the world's memory. But truth doesn't die. It waits. Her legacy survived through ruins, carvings, oral stories, and historical inscriptions that still speak across centuries. Archaeologists discovered stone inscriptions showing Kushite victories. They found evidence of the treaty. They discovered details of her reign carved into walls and monuments. Scholars began to recognize that she was far more important than earlier historians admitted. And today, her story rises again. He describes how, even now, people in Sudan and across Africa tell stories of powerful queens who defended the land. Her name echoes in songs, in traditions, in the pride of descendants who still walk the same deserts she once protected. Her victories can be felt in every Kushite pyramid still standing, every artifact unearthed, every scholar who chooses truth over distortion. Her story matters not only because she won a war, it matters because she proves something the world tried to forget. African civilizations were strong. African leaders were skilled. African women ruled nations, commanded armies, and shaped history. Queen Amanirenas stands as a symbol of courage, strategy, and unbroken pride. She shows that power has never been limited to one continent or one people. She shows that freedom must be protected with heart and sacrifice. And she shows that when history tries to bury someone, it often buries them because they were too powerful, not too small. The narrator begins to close the story, explaining that remembering her is more than historical correction. It's an act of respect. It's returning power to where it belongs. It's telling young black girls and boys that their ancestors did more than survive. They led, they built, they fought, and sometimes they defeated the greatest empires ever known. He turns back to the viewer with a final message. This queen was erased because her victory shattered the story powerful people wanted to tell. But you've heard her truth now, and truth, once spoken, cannot be buried again. Then he delivers a strong call to action. If this story opened your eyes, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who deserves to know that African history is filled with heroes, leaders, and legends. Drop a comment telling me which hidden queen or warrior we should uncover next. Together, we restore the stories the world tried to erase, one truth at a time. He ends with a reminder. They tried to bury her name. They didn't know they were planting a seed. And now, at last, the world is ready to let it grow.